welcome to the 5th Annual Kabuki Syndrome Foundation Conference. My name is Janet Lee, and I'm the Executive Director of Kabuki Syndrome Foundation and mom to Emily, who is 14 years old and has Kabuki Syndrome. For families or individuals who are joining us for the first time, we're so glad that you're here. The Kabuki Syndrome Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing new areas of research that will lead to life-changing treatments for those affected by Kabuki Syndrome. We believe that every individual with Kabuki Syndrome deserves the chance to reach their full potential. Next slide. KSF acts as an umbrella organization that brings together the world's leading experts to advance treatments for Kabuki Syndrome. These diverse perspectives help us to prioritize the most important areas of research to fund that will have the greatest impact. In order to drive progress in any rare disease, we've learned that there needs to be a collaborative network of patient families, clinicians, and researchers. Every year, our network continues to expand. Thank you for being here. Treatments for rare diseases are made possible by active and organized patient communities. I'm so excited to share that we currently have a total of $1.5 million committed to Kabuki Syndrome research over the next 2 years. A very special thank you to the Lumaji Foundation, the Deb and Paul Hayes Charitable Fund, Leila and Eduardo Zenya and Friends, the Singari Family Foundation, and our entire community for your incredible support. As the slide indicates, we have been very busy. Here is just a snapshot of some milestones from this year that show that our global network continues to grow. We understand the power of collaboration and continue to seek partnerships with biotech and academic institutions. It is truly an exciting time for Kabuki Syndrome research, but there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. With the first commercial clinical trial expected to start in 2024, now is the time for the most important push forward in Kabuki Syndrome research. In collaboration with our Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, our team has developed a Kabuki Syndrome research roadmap that will accelerate promising therapeutics from the lab to patients. This roadmap, called LEAP, is a $3.5 million innovative research plan that prioritizes projects that will help us learn more about Kabuki Syndrome, which can lead to the development of targeted treatments. I'm excited to share that we'll be announcing the awardees of our first ever collaborative grant in this program later on this morning. Enabling collaboration between patients, researchers, and clinicians is critical to fast-tracking progress. Later in the program, Dr. Bruce Bloom, the KSF Scientific Director, will be kicking off our discussion on the launch of the Kabuki Syndrome Outcome Measures and Biomarkers Consortium, KSOC. KSOC will create and validate Kabuki Syndrome-specific tools that can help take potential therapeutics to human clinical trials by pooling expertise, supporting an infrastructure that promotes data and sample sharing, and using our resources more efficiently. Accelerate promising therapeutic candidates to patients. We are actively engaging with our researchers and biotech companies, as well as our Medical and Scientific Advisory Board, to better understand how we can accelerate potential therapies from the lab to patients through funding and support. And prepare. We must prepare for successful clinical trials by identifying, engaging, and empowering patients to participate in research. KSF is exploring and executing multiple initiatives that will support improved diagnoses and prevalence figures. These projects are nonlinear and interconnected, and all of them enable us to take a significant leap forward in Kabuki Syndrome. We hope that you feel excited and encouraged by the progress that is happening, and more importantly, that you're ready to engage in driving this research roadmap. We are going to need a lot of commitment from you to help drive this forward. Rare disease patients and patient families have a different level of urgency to drive change. And today, we want to highlight the role that you have in accelerating treatment discovery and share initiatives that you can actively engage in immediately. Amanda, our Director of Communications, is now going to establish the framework for the conference and introduce these initiatives in greater detail. Amanda?
Thank you, Janet. I have a few announcements to share, and then I will dive into those three things that you can do today. I, too, am a mom to a daughter with Kabuki syndrome, and I thank you for being here. Just a couple housekeeping items, starting with the scientific symposium. We listened to your feedback over the past year, and we're making a real effort to create more opportunities for you to connect with the researchers, like our webinars as well. The scientific symposium this year was held on October 26th, and it was an opportunity for our research network to come together and build collaborations through sharing their detailed scientific findings. We will share a summary of the symposium soon, and you're welcome to explore the agenda and abstracts from that event on our website. Secondly, our Q&A sessions today are always very popular. You can submit a question at any time in the chat or the Q&A. If you want to direct it to a certain presenter, please just include their name as you type the question into the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. And if you're joining from a mobile device, I invite you to rotate your phone to landscape just for an easier experience. Lastly, many of you are looking forward to the panels and also breakout rooms today. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. We'll also capture them all offline. And in these breakout rooms at the end of the day, you can connect with other families, the adults from our panels, and a couple of Kabuki syndrome experts as well. Now, the three actions that you can take today, the most important things that you can do today. Number one, after the KSOC presentation and the Q&A, your first step to participating in this new project is to fill out the recruitment form that's linked in the menu at left. It's called KSOC Recruitment. Just let us know you're interested once you've had a chance to learn why we're sending 90 families to see the experts. The second thing we asked today is Kabuki Count. It's the global Kabuki syndrome census, and we launched it on October 23rd, just this year on the Kabuki Syndrome Awareness Day. We've already had nearly 700 individuals be counted, and we're leading a collaboration of 10 advocacy groups from around the world to answer the question we've all heard: how many people have Kabuki syndrome? We're answering it, and we're showing our partners in research the impact that they can have. And we're showing potential researchers and grant givers how active our community is. The form takes less than 3 minutes to complete at kabukicount.com, and it's also linked at left. The third thing we asked today is if you haven't already, please consider donating as you are able. We're very excited about these new opportunities and treatments that are in the pipeline, but ultimately their success depends on us. We have to continue to participate, collaborate, and donate as we are able to make these treatments happen. As a rare disease family, no one is more motivated than we are, and it's going to take all of us doing all that we can. We'll be here in the chat throughout the day today, and you can always reach out to us via email, our website, even social media. We're happy to connect you with a research opportunity that fits your family, and I hope you start with these three things today. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bruce Bloom.
So we call it KSOC, just so we have an acronym. Everybody has to have an acronym. We have one. It's the Kabuki Syndrome Outcome Measures and Biomarkers Consortium. And what that means is we have collected 5 institutions that are going to work together to see first 90 and then hopefully 150 patients. And why is my screen not moving? There we go. To collect data to try and validate the outcome measures and biomarkers that will help us to do some clinical research to get therapies advanced to patients. So how did we decide this was a key component of LEAP? Well, starting at the beginning of this year, we conducted extensive research. We interviewed patients, we interviewed caregivers, researchers, clinicians, and people from industry, and we uncovered 9 opportunities that Kabuki Syndrome Foundation is uniquely positioned to respond to. And then we polled our medical and science advisors to select the most critical opportunity for us to manage first. And as you can see here, these are the 9 different ways that we can help. And we're actually working on 8 of these 9 issues right now. But the most important one, as determined by our medical and science advisors, the people that see our kids and are advancing both the preclinical and the clinical research, was the outcome measures and biomarkers. So why was this? Why is that important? Well, outcome measures and biomarkers help us to determine whether any therapies that we're going to deliver to patients actually make a difference in the patient lives. And we do this by two ways. Outcome measures directly evaluate what matters most to patients and their families, how the patients feel or function, how their disease state changes, for example, on a vision test or a cognition test, or how their anxiety is different, all of those kinds of things in relation to any therapy that they're taking. Now, outcome measures can be objective, in other words, true measurement that you can check by looking at two different data points, or they can be subjective, like how do I feel? Do I feel more energized right now? Do I feel my vision is more clear? Do I feel happier? Do I feel less anxious? Biomarkers, on the other hand, check changes in human biology through things like blood work or taking a tissue sample. And these objectively measure some molecule or some nervous system thing that we can detect that would be responsive to treatment. Well, these are really critical because if we don't have these validated biomarkers and outcome measures, it's very difficult to get any kind of approval for the therapies that are coming into the pipeline. And I just want to point out on the bottom here, for neurological diseases that have a validated biomarker, in other words, a really objective measure of change, it improves the chance of a therapy advancing toward patients by over 20%, which is really critical. So when we have these validated outcome measures and biomarkers, then we can measure treatment efficacy. And that increases the chances of our clinical trials getting first approved and then used to be getting a regulatory approval so that patients can start using these drugs. It certainly opens up industry interest. The more we can help industry know that when they come up with a potential therapy, they can put it into a clinical trial and things get measured, the more likely they are to focus on Kabuki syndrome versus the other 10,000 rare diseases that are out there. And it asks them and allows them to bring more therapeutic candidates to Kabuki syndrome patients. So on my last slide, I just want to show you, and you're going to hear from our experts coming up, these are 3 biomarkers and outcome measures that we're hoping to validate in the next 2 years so that as the therapies come down the pipeline, we'll be able to measure them. And I'm going to talk about the drug development pipeline later in the presentation. But right now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jackie Harris, who is one of the PIs, principal investigators at one of the 5 sites for KSOC. So I'm going to turn this over to Jackie.
Thanks so much, Bruce. I will just share my slides. Hi, everybody. So that was a wonderful introduction by Bruce for everything that we're trying to do with this initiative. And I'm going to briefly talk to you a little bit more about the specific biomarkers that we're looking to validate in KSOC. So first, I wanted to share with you a little bit of a recent history lesson. So in 2011, 2012, there was a drug called arbaclofen that showed really, really exciting and promising preclinical data and even phase 2 clinical trial data in a syndrome called Fragile X syndrome. Fragile X is actually the most common cause of inherited intellectual disability. And so for those of you who don't know, when a drug is trying to come to market, you go through kind of three main phases of validation in clinical trials. Phase 1 is safety. Phase 2 is kind of moving from safety to efficacy, which means does it work? And then phase 3 is the definitive study of does it work? And so arbaclofen had shown great preclinical data, phase 1, phase 2, and now it's going to phase 3. They used caregiver-reported scales about behavior and cognition as their primary outcome measures. And they did this massive trial, and then no significant effect was seen in the primary outcome, but there was a suggestion of an effect in other areas in specific age groups. Despite this suggestion of an effect in these specific groups and in different areas, because there had been this massive investment into this phase 3 trial in arbaclofen, and it didn't meet its primary outcome, arbaclofen kind of died as a potential therapy for Fragile X. And the unfortunate thing about it is that it died without us ever really knowing whether arbaclofen could actually benefit patients with Fragile X syndrome. And so these are things, both of these examples that I'm about to go through are things we don't want to happen in Kabuki syndrome. So what lessons can we take from the arbaclofen trials? Well, first, caregiver-reported scales alone are not sufficient. You need a combination of cognitive and behavioral measures that are directly measured in participants, and as well as some caregiver or patient-reported scales. And we need specific outcomes for specific ages, but we need to try to cross-compare the domains between those outcomes and age groups to maximize what we call power, or the number of participants that we can use to see an effect. And then we need biomarkers. All of these things are what the investigators themselves from this Fragile X trial said they wish they had done to better assess whether or not arbaclofen was actually beneficial for Fragile X. And then just this year, the pharmaceutical company Roche suspended the development of the drug rugonersen for Angelman syndrome after the phase 1/2A trial. And they did not quite meet what they wanted to meet to proceed to a phase 3. For this trial, they used very broad cognitive and behavioral outcomes. They didn't hone in on a specific area. They didn't see a significant effect in the primary outcome, which was these broad cognitive and behavioral outcomes, but there was a possible effect in this EEG biomarker that they used. Unfortunately, because the EEG biomarker for Angelman syndrome was not completely validated before this trial was initiated, then they couldn't use this EEG to be able to proceed with the trial by itself. So the lessons from this is that overly broad cognitive measures are not likely to show an effect, and we need to thoroughly validate biomarkers for use in clinical trials. So how are we using these lessons and everything to design clinical trials and do clinical trial readiness studies for Kabuki syndrome? Well, a well-designed clinical trial has three things. It has a specific patient population. Well, we have that here. It has a therapy being tested. Well, you're going to hear more about that, but we have several in the pipeline or coming up very rapidly. And you need appropriate and clinically relevant outcome measures and biomarkers. And this is where KSOC comes in. And so a biomarker is a defined characteristic that can be used as an indicator of normal or pathogenic biological processes and or as a response to therapeutic intervention. The validation process for biomarkers is extensive and the FDA really sticks to it, so you can't bend on that, but it improves the probability of advancing a trial past a phase 2 by about 20%, which is huge. That's more than the chance it had to advance to a phase 3 from the beginning. So in this study, in KSOC, we are looking at the really development and validation of 3 biomarkers. The first is a neurophysiologic biomarker, which is called an ERP, or evoked-related potential, which is done with an EEG. And what we know is that Rubinstein-Taybi, a disease with molecular and clinical overlap to Kabuki syndrome, has deficits in what we call long-term potentiation in mice, which is how the brain learns. And so we wanted to look at this in the mice with Kabuki syndrome. And so what you could see here is on the left graph, the Kabuki syndrome mice are in the gray dots, and the light gray dots. And what you see is they actually have increased in early phase long-term potentiation. On the right graph, sorry for switching it up to you, the Kabuki mice are actually in the black, and what you see is it switches, and they actually have a decreased late phase long-term potentiation, indicating that these Kabuki mice are not retaining and storing these memories. And so we wanted to look at this in humans, to approximate long-term potentiation in humans. We can't put electrodes inside the brain, so what we do is an EEG measure. These are auditory EEGs where you listen to sounds, and they're good because they're easy, tolerable, and inexpensive to perform. We can test if the results from the EEG change over time with treatment, and we can correlate them with the cognitive outcome to make sure we're measuring what we want to measure. And they may, like Angelman syndrome, show an effect sooner than cognitive measures. The next biomarker we're developing is DNA methylation. So this technique called genome-wide DNA methylation can be measured with these methylation arrays. And Kabuki syndrome has a very specific profile of DNA methylation that is so specific and unique that it can actually be used to diagnose Kabuki syndrome. But what we want to know is not, can it be used to diagnose Kabuki syndrome, but can it be used to monitor treatment in a clinical trial? And so this is done with a blood draw. We are correlating the methylation signature with the cognitive phenotype that we get in the KSOC assessment visit. And the measurement of these specific sites for DNA methylation changes, they may correlate with the outcomes of interest, being cognitive and behavioral, but they may also give us insight into specific genes and targets important for Kabuki syndrome. The third biomarker is a metabolomic biomarker. So metabolomics is something where you look at small molecule products of important pathways in the body. This is also done with a blood draw and urine collection. We're also correlating this with the cognitive phenotype. And again, these measurements may also give us specific insight into pathways and targets important for Kabuki syndrome. So in summary, these three biomarkers, along with robust cognitive and neurobehavioral outcome measures, sorry, that says biomarkers, it's supposed to say outcome measures, I apologize, significantly increase the chances of success in Kabuki syndrome clinical trials. And so we need to develop these outcome measures and these biomarkers. And through initiatives like KSOC, we could do these at the same time. But the best way to do these is to correlate these things together. We need to make sure the biomarkers are measuring the outcomes of interest that we want to measure for our kids and adults with Kabuki syndrome. And we need your participation. We need these kids to come to do the cognitive assessment, these kids and adults, do the cognitive assessment, do the different trials for biomarkers, and move this field forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. So hi, everyone. I'm Clara. I'm the Director of Research at KSF, and I will be managing the KSOC. And today I will be letting you know who's involved with this consortium. So there are 4 clinic sites and 5 investigators involved across the US and in Canada. You can go to any of these 4 sites to donate samples and data for KSOC. So 2 of these sites are recruiting now. So we have Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland in the US, which is led by Dr. Harris, who you've just heard from, and she's our neurology expert. So Dr. Harris and her team will be analyzing the neuropsych data and ERP data. The other site that is recruiting participants now is Dr. Bodemer's site at the Roya Kabuki program at the Boston Children's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Botimer and his team will be analyzing your blood and urine samples to look for metabolomic biomarkers. We also have 2 sites that were open in 2024, but you can still fill in the KSOC form now to express your interest. So in Canada, we have Dr. Anadosto at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Toronto will be collecting your samples and blood data. Dr. Wexberg at Sick Kids will be analyzing your blood samples to develop a DNA methylation biomarker to measure treatment efficacy. And then last but not least, we also have a site on the west coast of the US at Seattle Children's in Washington. There you will see Dr. Adam, who will be collecting your samples and data. So just to reiterate, you can go to any of these 4 sites highlighted in green to participate in KSOC. These investigators are also supported by the KSOC Advisory Board, who is there to provide advice on any aspects of KSOC. And the current KSOC Advisory Board consists of clinicians and researchers that are experts in Kabuki syndrome and the development of biomarkers and outcome measures, including Dr. Hans Bjørnsen, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and Dr. David Genevieve from Montpellier, France. We also have experts in the field of bioinformatics, Dr. Winston Ballard from MIT. His expertise will be important when we're analyzing some of the data that we'll gather. We also have experts who have done similar things in our disease cousins with Dr. Kleefster from the Netherlands, who was the first to describe Kleefster syndrome. We also have a representative with years of experience in industry, Dr. Barbara Hanlon, who was the CEO of Audacity Therapeutics and is now the CEO and founder of the 9010 Institute. So we are very excited to launch this consortium, and we have gathered the best of the best, which will hopefully increase our chances of successfully validating 1 or more biomarkers. But none of this can happen without your contribution. So the most important people in KSOC are all of you, and we need samples and data from 90 people with Kabuki syndrome. So to participate, you must have a molecular confirmed genetic diagnosis of Kabuki syndrome, and we welcome everyone of all ages, so babies, toddlers, teenagers, adults, everyone of any background and either sex. International participants are also welcome at any of the 4 sites, but you must speak English as your primary language due to some of the testing that will take place during the KSOC appointment. Or if you're nonverbal, for example, a baby with Kabuki syndrome, you must be spoken to in English. Now I'll pass it on to Ludwyn, who will be going through what to expect when you attend your KSOC appointment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ludwyn. I work with Dr. Harris here in Baltimore, and I'll be going through the patient experience when they actually join a research study. So today we'll be covering travel, expenses, accommodations, what to bring, what the assessments we would be doing during the research visit, what it's like to meet with a specialist, a sample visit schedule, and after visit instructions or information, just all the little details that go into going to a research visit with us. So like they mentioned, there will actually be several locations, so this might differ based on the location that you participate in. But prior to your visit, generally speaking, you should receive an email with your visit instructions. This should also, and then you would also relay any travel arrangements to your coordinator with any lodging, flight arrivals, things like that. That way, if anything kind of comes up, we can be able to help troubleshoot. And then these are some other things that like transportation, free parking, that will also be a part of your visit as a perk. So this is a very important or curiosity thing for most of our participants that come in. We notice they just want to know like what is covered. So we're going to go through that today as well. All research visits could be done in 1 day. However, depending on a case-by-case basis, we have had 2-day research visits. So this research visit will extend to the Kabuki syndrome participant, to caregivers, and in some cases we've even had siblings come or a family friend. If a caregiver is unable to be there, that is coming to help out. And other expenses that we cover would be anything hotel or transportation related. And if there are some expenses that we don't anticipate but are communicated to us, we can go ahead and view that by case basis as well. Some accommodations that can be made, especially since a lot of our kiddos especially have some anxiety regarding our visits, is we can do a pre-visit meeting. This is a chance for them to meet me, Dr. Harris, or any of the other research team members to kind of go over what the visit would be like so that they can put a face to the research, as well as depending on the site, there might be like a child center or a garden that can help reduce the anxiety as well. You will also have a research team member with you throughout your visit. This is very helpful because you get to appointments on time. There will be plenty of breaks as well throughout the visit. And any other accommodations that we are communicated, we can also help out as best as we can. What to bring to a visit. Oftentimes we get like folders this big with paperwork because it's just a big hassle for them to be scanned in. So families find it easier just to bring physical copies and we just copy them on site. This is if we don't already have them. Any insurance cards, especially if you want to schedule a clinic visit that day. If you are seeing one of our doctors related to our research, insurance is not required, but if you want to take advantage of being at a health institute and getting other visits scheduled, insurance is helpful with that. Also, we're going to be starting to send self-report cognitive surveys to our adult participants so they can take their time in filling out those forms, and just things like food, toys, and whatever makes the visit just more bearable for our participants is highly recommended. So these are some assessments that we will be doing. We're going to be doing our cognitive testing. This can range depending if we've seen you or not, from 1.5 to 3 hours. 1.5 typically is if we've seen you before. 3 hours is typically for the very first cognitive test. 1 hour for EEG, some blood work, and urine collection. Like I mentioned before, you have an opportunity to schedule a clinic visit with one of our specialists. This is a great opportunity to develop a care plan with one of our neurologists. And although we will check insurance, it is not required. And regardless, there should not be any out-of-pocket expenses to see one of our neurologists. This is a sample day of what a research visit would look like. You would start off by checking in. You would sit down with your coordinator or whoever will be consenting you that day. This is a great opportunity to know a little bit more about the specifics of the research, to know what your participant rights are, which is the most important thing, such as if and when it's a good time to stop the study. After that, we go into cognitive testing. We do blood work, lunch, and then depending on case-by-case basis, if everything's going great, we might squeeze in an EEG, a clinic visit, and depending on the situation, we might spread out some of these assessments to a day 2 if needed. After the visit, it is important to save all your receipts because everything that you spend during your research visit is reimbursable through the KSF Foundation. So oftentimes families find it easier just to have me sit down and scan a bunch of receipts, and I will do it for you because this is money and we don't want these receipts getting lost. And also oftentimes families want to see these cognitive results as well. So we can also send summary reports as well. And any clinic visit notes will be in our EMR systems as well. And overall, we just want you guys to keep in touch because we want to know you guys are doing well. If you have any questions or just to see how everything's going. If you have any questions, as usual, here's information for my research team. But you can also reach out to your specific site directly with any questions before, during, after. I personally give out my phone number because I think it's easier when people can just text you. but depending on the site and their instructions on communication, you can reach them through their mode as well. That's it.